I watched my stepsister Vanessa walk into the awards ceremony with my signature high ponytail, the one I'd spent 3 years perfecting, the one fashion magazines had called iconic, the one that had become synonymous with my brand. She'd even copied the exact placement, sleek, impossibly high, with that slight leftward tilt that I'd developed because of an old scar on my scalp. She looked ridiculous. The ponytail didn't suit her round face at all, but she wore it with such smugness, such certainty that she was about to steal my thunder once again. Except this time, I wore my hair down. Loose, glossy waves cascaded over my shoulders, and I could see the confusion flicker across her face when she spotted me across the room. Then came the panic. She'd prepared for this moment for months, studying every interview I'd given, every photo shoot, every red carpet appearance. She'd built her entire look around, outdoing my signature style. And now, with my hair down, she just looked like a desperate copycat with no original thought of her own. But that wasn't even the best part. The best part was knowing exactly what would happen next, because I'd already lived through this night once before. In my previous life, I'd died at 28 in a car accident. Not just any accident, one orchestrated by Vanessa and my stepmother, Margaret. They'd tampered with my brakes after I'd signed a massive endorsement deal worth $50 million. The deal that should have secured my future. Instead, it secured my death. I remembered the terror of the brakes failing, the sickening crunch of metal, the cold darkness that followed. Then I woke up on my 18th birthday, a decade earlier, in my childhood bedroom with its faded pink wallpaper and the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a rabbit. At first, I thought it was a dream. Then I saw the date on my phone, exactly 10 years before my death. Every memory of the next decade was crystal clear in my mind, every betrayal, every stolen opportunity, every moment of abuse. Let me explain how I got here. My mother died when I was 7, leaving me with my father, Marcus Chen, a successful tech entrepreneur who loved his work more than he loved me. Within a year, he married Margaret, a social climbing beauty who brought her daughter Vanessa into our home. Vanessa was my age, pretty in a conventional way, and utterly vicious beneath her sweet exterior. From the moment they moved in, my life became a systematic dismantling of everything I was. Margaret was subtle about it. She never hit me, never screamed. She simply made sure I knew I was unwanted. My bedroom became the smallest room in the house. My clothes were Vanessa's hand-me-downs, even though my father could afford new ones. My achievements were minimized. Vanessa's were celebrated extravagantly. When I got straight A's, Margaret would sigh and say, "Well, it's easy when you have no social life, isn't it?" When Vanessa got B's, we'd have a family dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town to celebrate her incredible work ethic. My father was worse because he was absent. He traveled constantly for work, and when he was home, he was too tired to notice, or too unwilling to see what was happening under his own roof. Margaret had him convinced that I was a difficult, ungrateful child who resented her for trying to be a mother to me. Any complaint I made was reframed as evidence of my bad attitude. The real torture began when I discovered I had a talent for fashion design. At 15, I sketched my first dress, a simple A-line with an asymmetric hemline. I saved money from my part-time job at a coffee shop and bought cheap fabric to make it. When I wore it to school, 3 different girls asked where I'd bought it. I felt for the first time in years like I might have something that was truly mine. Margaret saw an opportunity. She encouraged my hobby, even bought me a better sewing machine for my 16th birthday, a rare kindness that I stupidly trusted. I spent the next 2 years creating a portfolio, developing a signature style. I became known at school for my designs. Girls commissioned me to make dresses for homecoming, prom, parties. I charged barely enough to cover materials, but I was building a reputation. Then came the moment that defined my first life. I applied to and was accepted to the Fashion Institute of Design in New York with a full scholarship. I was 17, and it was the happiest day of my life. I came home waving the acceptance letter, tears streaming down my face. My father was away on business, as usual. Margaret congratulated me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Vanessa said nothing, just stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That night, I went to sleep dreaming of fashion shows and studios and finally being free. I woke up to find my entire portfolio destroyed, every sketch torn to pieces, every dress I'd made cut into ribbons. My sewing machine smashed beyond repair, and in the middle of the wreckage, a note in Vanessa's handwriting. "Maybe now you'll know how it feels to have nothing." I broke down. I couldn't stop crying for 3 days. Margaret told my father I'd had some kind of mental breakdown, that I'd destroyed my own work in a fit of self-sabotage. She suggested I needed therapy, not fashion school. My father, who had never understood my passion for design anyway, believed her. He called the institute and declined the scholarship on my behalf, saying I was dealing with mental health issues and wouldn't be attending. I tried to fight it, but I was 17 and powerless. No one believed me. I had no proof that Vanessa had destroyed my work. My father looked at me with disappointment and concern, like I was a problem to be managed rather than a daughter to be trusted. That was the moment I learned that in my family, I would always be the scapegoat, and Vanessa would always be the golden child. But I didn't give up entirely. I couldn't. Fashion was the only thing that made me feel alive. So I went to community college instead, studied business and design, and slowly, painfully rebuilt my portfolio. I worked 3 jobs. I barely slept. I entered every competition I could find. And at 22, I finally caught a break. A small boutique in downtown LA agreed to carry 5 of my designs. They sold out in 3 days. Within 6 months, I had my own small line. Within a year, celebrities were wearing my dresses. Within 2 years, I was being called the next big thing in American fashion. My signature look became the high ponytail. Sleek, severe, powerful. It started because I was too busy to style my hair properly and just pulled it up one day before a meeting. A photographer caught me on the street and the photo went viral. Suddenly, the Chen ponytail was everywhere. Vanessa, meanwhile, had coasted through a mediocre college experience on my father's money, tried and failed to become an influencer, and was working as a junior marketing associate at a cosmetics company, bitter and jealous that her stepsister, the one who was supposed to be broken, was thriving. Margaret was even more bitter. She'd expected me to fade into obscurity, to be crushed by their abuse and never amount to anything. Instead, I was on magazine covers. My success was a constant reminder of her failure to destroy me. So, they escalated. They started spreading rumors that I'd stolen my designs from other designers. Anonymous social media accounts posted side-by-side comparisons of my work with older designs, claiming I was a fraud. The comparisons were superficial, similar colors or general silhouettes that any designer might use, but they gained traction. My reputation took a hit. I traced the accounts back to Vanessa's IP address, but by then, the damage was done. I spent months rebuilding trust with the fashion community, being extra transparent about my design process, sharing sketches and development photos. Then came the poisoning. I was preparing for my biggest show yet, the one that would either cement my place in the industry or prove I was a one-hit wonder. The night before, Vanessa invited me to dinner, a rare olive branch. She said she wanted to apologize for everything, that she'd been jealous and immature, that she wanted to start over. I was suspicious, but also desperately hopeful. Some part of me still wanted a family, still wanted to believe that people could change. So I went. She ordered us expensive wine. We talked about childhood, about our parents, about the future. The conversation felt almost genuine. I let my guard down. I drank the wine. I woke up in the hospital with severe food poisoning, violent and incapacitating. I missed my show entirely. My lead model had to walk without me there for final adjustments. 2 dresses had major malfunctions on the runway. The press called it a disaster. My company's stock plummeted. It took me months to recover, both physically and professionally. But I did recover. I always did. And that's when I signed the $50 million deal with a major athletic wear company to create a luxury sportswear line. It was my comeback, my vindication. The contract signing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I was driving to the meeting, running on pure adrenaline and coffee, my high ponytail perfect, my outfit impeccable. I never made it. The brakes failed on a steep hill. I remember pumping the pedal uselessly, the car accelerating instead of slowing. I remember the intersection approaching Toopgate, the truck that couldn't stop in time. I remember the impact, the pain, and then nothing. Until I woke up on my 18th birthday. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought I was in a coma, hallucinating. But as the day progressed, everything matched my memories perfectly. My father was on a business trip to Singapore, the one where he'd meet the investor who would double his company's valuation. Margaret was at her book club, the one where she'd first start spreading the rumor that I was anorexic to explain why I was so thin. Vanessa was at the mall with friends, buying the dress she'd wear to Jake Morrison's party, where she'd get drunk and make out with my then boyfriend. I had a choice: relive the same hell or change everything. I chose revolution. The first thing I did was document everything. I bought a small safe and hid it in my closet. I started keeping detailed journals of every incident, every cruel comment, every act of sabotage. I set up a hidden camera in my room because I knew with absolute certainty that when I got accepted to the Fashion Institute again, Vanessa would destroy my work again. And she did. But this time, I had video evidence of her breaking into my room at 2 a.m., systematically destroying months of work, her face twisted with rage and jealousy. I had audio of her laughing about it with her mother the next day, Margaret praising her for neutralizing the threat. I didn't use the evidence immediately. That would be too simple, too small. I was playing a longer game. Instead, I went to community college as before, but this time with purpose and strategy. I knew which professors would be most helpful, which connections to cultivate, which competitions were worth entering. I rebuilt my portfolio faster, better, smarter. But the key difference, I kept everything secret from my family. They thought I'd given up on fashion, that I was studying generic business courses to eventually get a boring corporate job. I was careful to never bring my work home, to never mention my growing success. When my designs started selling at the boutique again, I used a pseudonym, Lydia Blackwell. My real name, my face, those remained unknown to the public. I watched Margaret and Vanessa relax, thinking they'd won. Vanessa started casually mentioning she was thinking about getting into fashion, design herself, maybe launching a lifestyle brand. Margaret encouraged her, seeing it as a safe move now that I was apparently out of the picture. By the time I was 22, Lydia Blackwell was a rising star in fashion, and Chen Sophia, the real me, was still the invisible, disappointing stepdaughter working a data entry job at an insurance company, or so they thought. I dated different men this time, avoiding the toxic relationships I'd wasted time on before. I made smarter investments with my money. I built a team of lawyers and financial advisors I could trust. And I waited. The perfect moment came when I was 25. Vanessa, inspired by my previous life's success, had indeed launched a lifestyle brand. She called it V. Margaret Designs, using both her and her mother's names. It was exactly as vapid and unoriginal as you'd expect. Basic pieces with massive markups, relying entirely on influencer marketing and her mother's society connections. It was also failing spectacularly. Vanessa had no actual talent, no work ethic, and no understanding of the industry. She'd burned through hundreds of thousands of my father's money he'd refused to give me for my education but freely gave to her for her vanity project. That's when I made my move. I announced that Lydia Blackwell and Sophia Chen were the same person. I did it at a major Fashion Week press conference, revealing my face to the industry for the first time. I told a carefully edited version of my story, how I'd worked in secret to prove myself on merit alone without family connections or name recognition. The response was overwhelming. I became a sensation overnight, not just for my designs, but for my narrative. The underdog who'd succeeded despite everything. Vanessa's brand died within a week. Every article about her now included comparisons to her actually talented stepsister. Her investor meetings got canceled. Her influencer friends distanced themselves. She went from minor lifestyle personality to industry laughingstock. But I wasn't done. Using my new connections and considerable resources, I started investigating my father's company. I discovered what I'd learned too late in my previous life. Margaret had been systematically embezzling from him for years, funneling money into offshore accounts in preparation for an eventual divorce. She'd been patient, careful, stealing small amounts that wouldn't trigger immediate audits. I compiled all the evidence and sent it anonymously to my father's board of directors and the SEC. I knew my father would be furious at the betrayal, but I also knew he valued his company above all else. He'd have no choice but to act. The investigation was swift and brutal. Margaret was arrested for embezzlement and fraud. In the divorce that followed, she lost everything: the house, the cars, her social standing, and worst of all, her freedom. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Vanessa, who'd been complicit in some of the financial schemes, was hit with civil penalties that bankrupted her. She lost her condo, her car, everything she'd bought with my father's stolen money. She had to move into a studio apartment in a bad part of town and get a job as a retail associate. My father was devastated, but he survived professionally. His company took a temporary hit but recovered, and for the first time in my life, he actually looked at me, really looked at me, and saw what he'd ignored for so long. "I'm sorry," he said one night over a stiff drink in his now empty house. "I failed you. I was so focused on work that I didn't see what was happening in my own home. I chose my convenience over your well-being. I have no excuse. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. I didn't forgive him, but I didn't cut him off entirely either. I kept him at a distance, saw him occasionally for tense, formal dinners. He tried in his limited way to make amends. He offered me money, which I refused. He offered to invest in my company, which I also refused. I didn't want anything from him except acknowledgement, and he'd finally given me that. By the time I was 27, I'd exceeded every success from my previous life. My company was valued at over $200 million. I'd won every major fashion award. I had homes in New York, Paris, and Tokyo. I'd dated genuinely good men and had real friendships with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. And I'd never worn a high ponytail again. That hairstyle had been a symbol of my suffering in my first life. Born from exhaustion and necessity, turned into a trademark I'd never chosen. In this life, I wore my hair however I wanted. Down, in loose braids, in elegant chignons. Never the ponytail. Which brings me back to tonight. The awards ceremony was for the International Fashion Council's Designer of the Year, the most prestigious award in the industry. I'd won it in my previous life too, but that victory had been bittersweet, achieved while my family actively tried to destroy me. This time, I was walking in wearing a custom gown I'd designed specifically for this moment. A midnight blue silk dress with an asymmetric neckline and a subtle train, my dark hair falling in glossy waves over one shoulder. I looked powerful, confident, and completely unlike the Sophia Chen that Vanessa remembered. Vanessa's plan had been pathetically transparent. She'd somehow gotten herself invited as a +1 to a minor designer I'd worked with years ago. She'd copied my old signature look down to the smallest detail, planning to make a scene about how I'd stolen her style, how everything I'd achieved was built on copying her ideas. She'd even prepared a social media campaign, I later learned. Photos of her wearing ponytails from years ago, all dated after I'd made the style famous, but she'd planned to claim the metadata was wrong. Testimonials from paid friends saying she'd always worn her hair that way. A whole narrative about the real creative genius behind the Chen brand. It would have been laughable except for the fact that in my first life, similar schemes had actually worked, at least partially. People wanted drama, wanted to believe in backstabbing and scandal. The truth was often less interesting than a good lie. But now, with me wearing my hair down and looking completely different from my old public image, her plan fell apart before it even began. She looked like exactly what she was, a desperate woman copying a style that was no longer relevant, trying to claim ownership of something she'd never created. I watched her throughout the cocktail hour, saw her growing panic as people pointed and whispered, saw her trying to explain to anyone who would listen that this was her look, that I'd copied her, saw the polite, confused smiles of people who'd known me for years and had never seen me wear a ponytail. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The venue was a converted industrial space with soaring ceilings and dramatic lighting. The fashion industry's biggest names were all there. Designers, models, photographers, journalists. I sat at a table with my team, people who'd been with me from the early days of Lydia Blackwell, who knew my real story. When they announced my name as the winner, the applause was thunderous. I walked to the stage, my heart pounding but my steps steady. I'd prepared a speech, but as I stood at the podium looking out at the crowd, I decided to say something different. 10 years ago, I began. I was a teenager with a dream and a family that tried to crush that dream at every opportunity. They destroyed my work, sabotaged my opportunities, and did everything they could to make me believe I was worthless. I was accepted to a prestigious design school, and they made sure I couldn't go. They wanted me to disappear, to give up, to accept that I would never be anything. The room was silent, everyone leaning forward. But I didn't disappear. I worked 3 jobs, put myself through school, and built this career from nothing. Every dress I designed, every collection I created, came from a place of pure determination. And I did it without their help, without their approval, and despite their active interference. I paused, letting the words sink in. In the back of the room, I could see Vanessa, her face pale, trying to edge toward the exit. I'm sharing this because I want every young designer out there who's being told they're not good enough, not talented enough, not worthy enough. I want you to know that they're wrong. The people who try to diminish you are afraid of what you might become. Your success is the best revenge you'll ever have, and wearing it well is the sweetest victory. The applause when I finished was even louder than before. People stood. I saw tears on some faces, recognition on others. My story wasn't unique. So many people in this industry had fought against families, against poverty, against systems designed to keep them out. As I left the stage with my award, a beautiful crystal sculpture that caught the light like a prism, I walked past Vanessa's table. She was crying, mascara running down her face, her ridiculous ponytail slightly askew. Our eyes met for just a moment. I smiled. Not a cruel smile, not triumphant, just a smile that said, I won. After the ceremony, the real celebration began. My team took me to an exclusive club where they'd reserved the VIP section. Champagne flowed. Friends from the industry stopped by to congratulate me. I danced for the first time in months, just let loose and felt the pure joy of this moment. Around 2 a.m., my phone rang. It was my father. I watched the live stream of your speech, he said without preamble. Sophia, I don't know what to say. I knew things were bad, but I didn't realize the extent of what they did to you. The scholarship? I never knew about the scholarship. You didn't want to know, I said, my voice flat. I tried to tell you. You chose not to believe me. I know, and I have to live with that, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not just for your success, but for who you've become despite everything I failed to give you. You're stronger than I ever was. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. It didn't fix anything. Some things are too broken to repair, but it was a kind of closure. Thank you, I said finally. That means something. We hung up and I went back to my celebration, but I felt lighter somehow, like I'd finally let go of the last weight I'd been carrying from my previous life. The next morning, I woke up in my penthouse apartment with a slight headache and a crystal award on my nightstand. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the New York skyline. I made myself coffee and sat on my balcony, wrapped in a cashmere throw, watching the city wake up. My phone was full of messages, congratulations from colleagues, interview requests from magazines, even a text from a director asking if I'd be interested in doing costume design for his next film. I scrolled through them slowly, savoring each one. But the best message was from an unknown number. You've destroyed everything. I hope you're happy. My mom is in prison. I'm broke, and you're a success. This is all your fault. Vanessa, even now, unable to take responsibility for her own actions. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. Instead, I opened my laptop and started sketching. I had ideas for my next collection, inspired by the concept of rebirth and transformation. Designs that started constrained and rigid, then gradually became free and flowing. I worked for hours, losing myself in the creative process that had saved me not once, but twice. Over the following weeks, my life settled into a new rhythm. The award brought even more attention and opportunities. I was invited to collaborate with museums, to speak at universities, to mentor young designers from underprivileged backgrounds. I said yes to the mentorship especially, remembering my younger self, alone and unsupported, desperately needing someone to believe in her. I started a foundation that provided scholarships and resources to aspiring designers who faced family opposition or financial hardship. I called it the Lydia Blackwell Foundation, keeping my pseudonym alive as a reminder of the secret years when I'd had to hide my true self to survive. 3 months after the awards ceremony, I heard through the grapevine that Vanessa had moved to another state, trying to start over where nobody knew about her scandals. Margaret would be in prison for at least 5 more years. My father had sold his tech company and retired early, moving to a quiet coastal town. We spoke occasionally, brief and cordial, the relationship of polite acquaintances rather than father and daughter. I didn't miss any of them. I'd built my own family, my team, my friends, my mentees, people who chose to be in my life and whom I chose in return. People who celebrated my victories and supported me through challenges, people who saw me as I truly was and loved me for it. 6 months later, I was in Paris for Fashion Week, sitting in a cafe near the Seine, when I saw a girl who couldn't have been more than 19. She was sketching frantically in a notebook, her face intense with concentration. Her clothes were worn but clean, obviously secondhand but styled with care. She had that hungry look I recognized, the look of someone who wanted something so badly it hurt. I bought 2 coffees and walked over to her table. "Mind if I sit?" I asked. She looked up, startled, then her eyes widened with recognition. "You're Sophia Chen." "Oh my God, I'm sorry, I know you probably get bothered all the time." "What are you drawing?" I interrupted gently. She hesitated, then turned her sketchbook toward me. The designs were rough but showed real promise. Interesting silhouettes, innovative construction ideas, raw talent waiting to be refined. "These are good," I said, meaning it. "Have you studied design?" "I can't afford school," she said quietly. "I work at a restaurant and sketch in my free time. I probably won't ever I know it's a long shot." 10 years ago, I was exactly where you are, I told her sus. I thought I'd never make it either, but I kept working, kept pushing, and I found a way, and you will too. I gave her my card and told her about the foundation, about the scholarship applications opening next month, about the mentorship program. I watched hope bloom across her face, the same hope I'd felt when I'd gotten my first acceptance letter. This, I realized, was what victory really looked like. Not just my own success, but using that success to help others who were still fighting the battles I'd already won. As I walked back to my hotel that evening, the sunset painting Paris in shades of gold and rose, I thought about both my lives, the one where I'd been destroyed and the one where I'd triumphed. I thought about the high ponytail I'd never wear again, the symbol of a survival I'd outgrown. I thought about Vanessa, probably in some anonymous city, maybe wearing her hair in a ponytail because she'd never learned to be anything other than a copy of someone else. And I thought about myself at 18, waking up with 10 years of memories and a chance to do it all differently. That girl had been terrified and determined in equal measure. She'd taken her pain and turned it into power. She'd taken her defeat and turned it into victory. I'd become someone I was proud of, someone my younger self would have admired. I'd built an empire not from privilege or connections, but from talent, hard work, and the kind of strength that comes from surviving hell and choosing to bloom anyway. The past didn't hurt anymore. The people who'd tried to destroy me were no longer obstacles, but cautionary tales. Examples of what happens when you build your life on cruelty and theft instead of your own merit. I'd won in every way that mattered. I had wealth, success, respect, and most importantly, peace. I'd gotten justice without becoming consumed by revenge. I'd risen without stooping to their level. And every time I wore my hair down loose and free, I was reminded that I was no longer the girl who'd been too busy surviving to have choices. I was a woman who'd survived, thrived, and now lived exactly as I wanted. That night, back in my hotel suite, I stood in front of the mirror and brushed out my hair, watching it fall in waves over my shoulders. Somewhere in another city, Vanessa might be copying this look too, desperately trying to reclaim relevance by mimicking whatever I did next. It didn't matter. She could copy my hairstyles, my designs, my entire aesthetic. But she could never copy the thing that mattered most, the journey that had forged me into who I was, the pain that had taught me resilience, the betrayal that had taught me discernment, the rebirth that had taught me that sometimes you get a second chance to become who you were always meant to be. I smiled at my reflection, raised a glass of champagne to the woman I'd become, and whispered, "This is what victory looks like." And it was sweet. The next morning, I had a meeting with a major studio about designing for their new period drama. After that, lunch with a journalist from Vogue. After that, a fitting with a client who'd commissioned a wedding dress. My days were full of purpose, creativity, and collaboration. As I got dressed, I caught myself reaching for a hair tie, about to pull my hair up out of habit. I stopped, smiled, and left it down. Some symbols are worth keeping, and this one reminded me every day I was free to be exactly who I wanted to be. No more survival mode, no more hiding, no more letting others define my worth or my choices. Just me, Sophia Chen, designer, mentor, survivor, and most importantly, victor. I walked out into the Paris morning with my head high and my hair flowing free, ready for whatever came next. Because I'd already faced the worst and come out stronger. Everything else was just the beautiful aftermath of a war I'd already won. And if Vanessa was somewhere copying my hairstyle again, trying to capture even a fraction of what I had, well, she'd learn what she'd always been too arrogant to accept. You can copy someone's appearance, but you can't copy their substance. You can steal their style, but you can't steal their story. My story was mine alone, hard-earned, dearly bought, and absolutely, triumphantly victorious.